lyrics that I ever heard. There's a message in the songs of birds. Tomorrow is another day. Living is the only way tomorrow's gonna ever come. Listen to the words of the song. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything is gonna be
Thank you for joining me for tonight's episode of The Sip of Inspiration. And I always have to thank Teresa Griffin for allowing me to use her music as my opening and close without actually suing me. So it's like, that's always a pleasure. I love this song. It's so fitting for what we do here tonight. Joining me is a very special guest. Jamal Jivanjee is my guest for tonight. But before we get started, it's that housekeeping stuff that we have to do. So remember, the website is champagneconnection.com. Go right over there. And there's a lot of free gifts. And I just updated the free offer for Blueprint to Financial Success. So you'll enjoy that. So if you sign up for the email, you will get email trickles for about the next 2 weeks about things that you can do in order to change your life. So, I enjoy bringing you all of the benefits of the lessons that I have learned so you can live your best life also. At the champagneconnection.com, there's also merchandise, and I always promise I'm going to wear some. Today is not that day, but I promise I will one day wear some merchandise so that you can see how it looks. I do work out in it, though. So if you catch me on the walking trail, you will see that shirt. I want to thank my sponsor, Rise. When you need a supply company to rise to your needs, call Resource Industrial Supply and Equipment. They've been a sponsor of every episode, and we are so grateful to have them. So now that we have the housekeeping done, I want to introduce Jamal Jivanjee. Jamal is a life coach. Jamal, like me, has probably seen and heard every single thing he could possibly see and heard about someone's life. So I thought it would be really interesting to bring someone else on the show with me so that we can talk about all of the things that he has experienced and he's learned in his life. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jamal, so you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Dr. Stephanie, thank you so much for your gracious invitation to be on your show. Before, I get into that a little bit, I always just want to say thank you for people who create platforms and shows like this, because I know the work and the intentionality that it takes, and it's a significant contribution to the world. And I just want to say thank you for that. And it's an honor to be here and to be a part of your show. So, but we were talking a little bit before we went live here that I live in Southern California. My wife and I, we live in a little mountain community about an hour and a half east of Los Angeles. I'm a full-time life coach, author, podcaster, but I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. So I'm born and raised out there, and really loving life out here in the mountains in California now, though.
So what's the difference in the move? I know this is off topic, but all the way from Ohio to California, that had to be a culture shock. So what do you enjoy about living there?
It's a great question. Well, I feel like it matches my soul, so to speak, in many ways. There's something about California, the West Coast, that there's an openness here and expansiveness. A lot of people that live out here in Los Angeles, and there are people that have traveled out. I mean, even historically came out here to pursue a better life, to hit their dreams, to explore. So that has an effect on the culture here. So I really enjoy that. I'm not a huge fan of 6-month winters or, gray skies. So something about California, the sunshine. This is the only place in the country you can be skiing, be in the desert, and also be at the ocean in the same day. So it's a fantastic place to live.
I say us in the Midwest have winter twice a year, it seems.
Oh, I remember.
You have it in the fall sometimes, you have it in the winter, and you can even have it in springtime, sometimes.
Absolutely. I remember those days for sure.
So I have a list of questions. All the people who watch me expect me to have a list of questions, and I try to warn the guests that I have a list of questions. And it's like, and sometimes they're mostly for me because I'm incredibly inquisitive. Thank God, because I'm always trying to figure out how to change your life. And I think that changing your life is a lot easier than the press or the media would have us to believe. And unless we talk to people like you, we would never know. So I want to start off. You wrote a book. So could you tell us a bit about your book and where we can find it?
Absolutely. I wrote a book. It came out in 2019. It's called Living for a Living. And I'll tell you a little bit about the book. One of the reasons, first of all, one of my favorite things about the book is the title, Living for a Living, because it comes out of kind of a frustration, so a pet peeve I've always had when people ask the question, what is it that you do, for a living? And I know what people mean by the question. I know what the question means, but I feel like it's phrased it's not phrased correctly. So what people should say is, what do you do for money? And we assume that what you do for money and what you do to live, to actually truly experience the vitality of life, are the same thing. And oftentimes they can be, but oftentimes they're not. And I grew up in a family where there was a lot of generational struggle, poverty. And so the focal point for my family, going back generations, was, the focus of life was survival, working. So it's all about getting good grades, getting a good education, going to college, getting the great job, so you can get a good job, so you could make money, and then you could, survive. And after watching, my parents do that, and I was very thankful for that, thankful for their sacrifice, thankful for what they went through, there was something inside of me that was just crying out, saying, there's got to be more to life than actually just survival. So it set me on a journey, on a quest to understand, to actually discover that survival is not why we're here. We're actually here to live.
Yes.
And when we focus on living, survival comes with that. But that's not a seamless transition, because, like a lot of people, I was trained, conditioned to focus strictly on survival for many years. A lot of my work was about surviving, paying the bills, but it really wasn't about living. So the book is really my journey from what I say, working from an economy of survival and transitioning to an economy of love and service, because that's a monumental shift. But that's what the book is about. And that book can be found it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, anywhere you really can order books. So.
Okay. So I have a question that says, what's the difference between pain and suffering? So it seems as if people get those intertwined, just like living and making money, and like that's living, but that's, like you said, that's just making money. That's not really living. So what's the difference between pain and suffering, and how would someone make a change to break that chain? Because it seems like we're stuck in one or the other.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a great question. The difference between pain and suffering, right? So pain is a part of life. I always say pain is a part of life. It's pain is actually not what is driving the suicide rate. Pain is not leading us to drug abuse and substance abuse. Pain isn't leading us to incarceration it's not pain that does that. It's suffering. So as a very simple analogy of the difference between the two, it's probably too simplistic, but I like to use it just because it's easy to understand. All of us have experienced pain. So for example, like physically speaking, let's say you walk across the floor. This happened to me a couple weeks ago. I was got up in the middle of the night, and I had left something sitting in the middle of the floor, and stubbed my toe right into this thing in the middle of the night. And when that happens, it's excruciating. It's excruciating pain. And when you're experiencing that pain, life comes to a halt for like just stubbing your toe. I couldn't think about anything for the next minute or so. It was all my attention went to my big toe that was throbbing. But then after a couple of minutes, it starts to get a little bit less and less. You start to come back to your senses. You start to remember life is okay. It's not the end of the world. Everything's okay. And then it's over. So it's like a wave. It comes, it crests, it subsides. That's the nature of pain. And there are painful events that happen in life. Suffering's a bit different, however. So, for example, let's say I walk across the floor, stub my toe. It's painful for sure. But then there's a narrative that begins to kick on, and it says, "Oh, here you go again. You can't even walk across the floor without stubbing your toe." And then I might get into this thing. I live with the most inconsiderate people that just leave stuff laying on the floor. You know what? Nobody picks up after themselves. It's only me. I'm the only one who takes care of this place. And this is the story of my life. I can't even walk across the floor without stubbing my toe. Now that's a narrative, right?
Mhm.
That's suffering. So the pain may subside, but now I'm really angry because life feels unjust. Now, this is kind of a simplistic example here, but suffering is tied to a narrative. It's tied to a perception of the way life is. It's not actually tied to life itself. It's a narrative. So the difference between pain and suffering is that pain it's a physiological effect. I mean, things can jolt us, affect us, but when it's just an event. So I always tell people there are events in life, but suffering is tied to a narrative. It's a story. It's the subconscious, unconscious programming that the event will elicit that leads to our suffering. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just made a note that said suffering is the story you tell yourself about the pain. It's like
absolutely. It's a great way to put that.
Yeah. So how do you stop yourself when you're in the middle of, because sometimes it's an automatic process. I know, and I'm talking about me now because I know I've done that, and then I have to say, you got here because you stubbed your toe walking across the floor, girl, get real, right? So I had to actually do that. It's like nobody left that out there thinking that you were going to fall over it. They really didn't.
It's not personal.
That's right. It's not personal. It's not what they thought. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you advise people to stop that narrative? Because if they don't interrupt it, then it does become how you think about everything in your life.
Oh, absolutely. One of the that's a great question. One of the things I like to do to interrupt a pattern, right? And in the coaching world and the coaching work, that's primarily how I see my role as a coach, is to be a disruptor of the patterns. It's a question I like to ask is, hey, do you like how you're feeling right now? So I like to ask I can ask myself that. If I'm feeling agitated or upset, I might ask, do I like how I'm feeling right now? Now, I don't want to suppress what I'm feeling, right? Because that can lead to bypassing and suppressing. And, again, we don't want to do that. There's a lot of implications to that negative implications that will happen if we suppress. But I like to take inventory. How do you feel about what you're feeling? Do you like it? And the answer is no, I don't like it. Like I've never met somebody that says, I really enjoy being angry all the time. I really enjoy feeling like a victim all the time. Like I've never met anybody that says that. So what I like to do is I say, okay, if you don't enjoy what you're experiencing, okay, let's take note of that. Where are you experiencing it? Just a simple question. Some people look at me like, what do you mean? It's like, where are you experiencing this anger? Is it like above you? Is it to the left of your body? Is it to the right? Where is it? Well, it's always inside, isn't it? It's like,
right.
No, it's in
always inside. Yeah.
It's always inside. So it's like, okay, so you're experiencing something you don't like on the inside. Who has control of your inside? I like to ask that question. Who has control of your inside? Do you have control of your inside? Or does somebody else have control of your inside? Does the situation? So, I'm convinced that the human condition, every human being longs for liberation, longs to be free. This is the nature of what it means to be human, to be free. So I always say, if you were free on the inside, would you choose this state of being? Would you choose to be miserable? Would you choose to be upset? Would you choose? And the answer is always no. So that means we've given power away, because ultimately there's a lot of things we don't have any control over, right? We don't control the weather. We don't control the political situation, the economic situation that's happening in the world directly, at least on a day in, day out basis. But what do we have control over? I've only come to one. We certainly don't control other people, what other people think or say or do. We don't control any of that. We have no control over that. But the one dimension of life that we actually have control over is our internal state of being. That's actually the only thing we have control over. But that's actually where life is being experienced, is on the inside. So I always tell people, if you want to have control, or if you want to experience life on your terms, we have to start taking control of that inner dimension. And the first step into taking that control back is realizing, where did we give the power away? Where did we give it away? Who did we give it away to? And just identifying that. And then that can lead to some discovery.
What about helping them change the words that they even use when they find themselves down that slippery slope?
Absolutely. Well, and that could be, and so one of the things we do in coaching really quickly is we kind of get into the science of frequency, of sound, and how frequency actually creates, So I like to take people back to, how did this whole entire universe come into being? Now, we know this from quantum mechanics, that everything is a vibration.
Right.
It is a byproduct of frequency. But even if if somebody comes from a spiritual background, right, even in the New Testament, in the Bible, it says that God created everything
right
through the word, which is, what is a word? It's a vibration at the end of the day. A word is simply a vibration that gives expression to something intangible. So I always say, whatever you speak and give words to, you are literally following the pattern of creation. You're bringing into space and time a specific tangible vibration. So be careful what you say, because again, I like to use words in two ways. In a descriptive way, to describe how I'm feeling. You could describe how you're feeling. You can feel sad. I like to tell people, yes, tell us how you're feeling. I feel sad. I feel angry. I feel mad, whatever it is, no problem. But when it comes to describing your identity, I always say, be very careful for what comes after the term I am. Whatever you say I am, whatever follows I am, has to be true of you, because what you're about to declare and speak is going to affect your perception, your experience with life, because now, you're identifying with something. So words are extremely, extremely powerful. And just to kind of give you an illustration about that, I recently heard a story about a guy who was actually homeless, and he had, went through a lot of struggles. He was an educated guy who had, just would kind of defy the odds when if you were to hear a story. Most people, if they see a homeless person, they kind of write them off or have a stereotype about them. But when you talk to this guy, he, just like anybody else, and he had just had some series of really difficult, painful events happen, which formed a narrative. And so when you talk to this person, he would tell you about that pretty readily. He would talk about his problems, his struggles, his narrative. So there was a coach that just kind of listened to him and said, hey, I know you've been through a lot, and we don't invalidate that at all. He said, how serious are you about wanting to change your circumstances? The guy said, I'll do anything. I'm desperate. I'll do whatever it takes. He said, okay, I'll just give you one tip. There's just one thing I'll tell you to do. He said, I just want you to pay attention to the words that come out of your mouth. Mm-hmm. He's like, I want you to watch what you say and how you say it and what you speak. And I know that you spent a lot of time talking about the past. You spent a lot of time talking about the things that have affected you. Get that. I don't want to invalidate that. He said, but what I would like you to do for the next 6 months is, I want you, when you realize you're talking about the past, I want you to shift to this moment. And in this moment, I want you to look for the blessings. I want you to look for the things that you feel grateful for. And I want you to talk about that. Just speak about it, even if it's to yourself, but say it. This is what I have. This is what I'm grateful for. This is what I see. And they kind of gave him those instructions. And about 6 months later, some folks ran into him again and conducted an interview with him. And he had his own place. He had found a job, and he was like in a completely different trajectory in life. And all that changed. Literally, all of these doors started to open for him when he changed his vocabulary, changed his words, changed his speech. it literally, he said it was like a miracle happened. Doors just started opening. But I understand the science behind that, that literally what he was doing was he was using frequency to create, because we're creators as human beings. He was using frequency to create and to open energetic doors that he needed to go into. And it's a lot of people say it can't be that simple. It's got to be more than that. Oh, I say, yeah, it's more than that, but it's not less than that. It's not less than that. So changing your life starts with words, for
it
sure.
starts with words. And I think, having been homeless, having been told I was going to die, it's almost as simple as that. I don't want to downplay all the other things that you have to do, but changing what you talk about, what you think about, how you see things I think people think that that's simple because they don't really cost you any money or anything. You don't have to go get an education. It's difficult to make that transition, but when you allow yourself to do it, to make that transition, like you said, talk about what's good, talk about what you'd like to experience. The words don't cost you anything, but you'll be surprised. I found people find a battle inside of their own minds when they start that. So I think that would be the struggle, the suffering part that they're having to overcome. So I guess that's why they would think it would be difficult.
Sure. I mean, because we're told, right?
Right.
We're conditioned to see the problem as being outside of us.
Yes.
But when we understand we use words, we realize we're creating, even, like, how do you even write a word? You have to spell it out, right? Spell. It's interesting that we talk about spell, right? What is a spell?
Right.
Well, when your words are casting a spell, that's the power of the words. They cast a spell, and they can cast a spell towards truth, or they can cast a spell towards untruth. And when they cast a spell towards untruth, the byproduct is suffering and bondage.
Mm-hmm.
But when we, go back to the words of Jesus, when he said, when you know the truth makes you free. And we spell that out. We literally declare it. It's a fantastic ability and power that we all possess.
Yes, it is. We do all possess it too. But letting that negative stuff go seems to be almost an addiction to hold on to it for some reason. We seem to be addicted to the negative emotions or the negative frequencies that we feel. So how did you get into life coaching? What was your first clue that this is where you needed to be, that this is the space that was calling you to participate?
That's a great question. Well, it came out of my own suffering and my own pain. And I didn't know this for many years, but I was on the run for my own life, and I was trying to do a lot of great things out here. I've always been passionate about helping people, but I didn't realize that the pathway to actually changing the world, because I've always wanted to change the world. I always wanted to help people. I feel like I'm here to be a healer and to help people. But the reason I was passionate about that is because there was something in me that needed deep healing and deep attention. I wasn't aware of that. So after being on the run for that for so many years, eventually it caught up with me. And there were two major pain points in my life that needed addressing. Number one was that I had this deep, and it's energetic. It's at the core of my being. And a lot of this has to do with, we're not born into a vacuum. We're born into history. And whose history are we born into? Well, immediately we're born into our mother and father's history. And then they have a whole, that has many layers to it. There's cultural layers, there's personal layers, there's genetic layers, there's all kind of layers of history that we're born into. And one of the things that affected me was a deep fear of abandonment. And the other one was a deep sense of insufficiency, not being quite enough, not measuring up. This was just
I know that one well. Yeah, I know that feeling well.
Right.
Yeah.
It's there, and those those pain points actually form a voice. And it's not an audible voice in the way we think audible voice physically. I mean, there's different dimensions of voice, but this is a psychological voice. It's a psychological construct. And this is, I so identified with it. So when somebody said, who is Jamal? Well, unconsciously, Jamal's the one who's eventually abandoned. Jamal's eventually the person who doesn't measure up. Well, this caught up with me eventually. And eventually ended up going through a divorce, lost all my income, lost all my friends, all the contacts in my life. And I began to live out these narratives of being abandoned and of not being quite enough. I lived it out. And it was in the depths of depression, of just, I gave up. I was homeless. I had nowhere to go. I had, outside of, the grace of a few close, loved ones that took me in and really were concerned about me. I had no will. I was done with life. I was ready to go. And I would say I was suicidal, but I was too tired to even commit suicide. Literally, I couldn't even bring myself to that point. But if I could have hit a button at that point to end my life, I would have totally done it, because I was finished. And I remember this thought. There was this thought that entered my consciousness. I call it the grace of God, but it came from beyond my psychological construct. And this thought it was so, I'll never forget it. It's very loud. And it spoke to me, and it said, since you want to die, since you're so, ready to give up your life, why don't you talk to some people or hear the stories of people who have died and have come back and had experiences? And I said, oh, what is this? That was kind of threw me for a loop. I was like, people who have died and come back, what is that? So I started doing some research, and I found that there was an entire group of people who have had these things called near-death experiences, NDEs. And there was a medical doctor that actually wrote a book. It's called Life After Life. And this doctor documented about 100 cases of people who had actually physically died, and it could be verified clinically, and had experiences that were verified to be true, that they would have no way of knowing, because it happened post-death, but they were present and in spirit and were able to witness certain things. And so this doctor put together these stories as credible stories, and he interviewed them about their experiences. So I just devoured that. And I remember in the story, there were, all of them were a little bit different, but there were some common themes. And one of the themes that was communicated to each person was, you're here on purpose and you're not ready. Your life, like the reason, and they were told they have to come back to their body, because they had work to do. There was something they were here to learn, and there were things they were here to do, and it wasn't complete. And so they were sent back. And just that awareness, when these people came back into their body and were resuscitated, their lives were profoundly altered, because they knew there are no throwaway days. Every day you wake up, every day you're here, you are here on purpose. And you don't even need to know the purpose as much as just be aware that it is on purpose, because your purpose is unfolding as you engage with life. That radically shook me and awoke me. That was one aspect, and that started my journey into looking for healing. At that point, it didn't matter what I had lost, what people, as we were talking, what people thought, none of that mattered. Now I realized this life that I'm here, at some point it's going to be over. We're not here forever in the physical body here. But when I am here, and I am here right now, I'm here on purpose, and that's a serious thing, and I want to take it seriously. So that was the first aspect of that. The second aspect was kind of a little more simple. I remember shortly in that same time period being really in the throes of my victim. I was really angry. I remember sitting on the couch with a friend, and I was venting. And this friend I was sitting with, she was so nice and gentle. She was always so kind to me, and she would always listen to me, and so patient. But this particular evening, as I was venting, she had a different look on her face. She didn't look too happy. And I just kind of noticed that. And I looked at her and I said, "What's wrong with you? Everything okay?" And she's like, "Do you ever just stop and listen to yourself?" I said, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You're a broken record. Like, you say the same thing over and over, And she's like, and I've been listening to this sob story about how bad your life is and how people have done you wrong and you can't catch a break and all this. She said, doesn't it get old for you? I couldn't believe it. Like I was shocked. And then I thought, oh no, not you too. Oh, you're another one of those people that are, okay, you're part of that group. Okay. And I started getting angry. And she said, I said, it must be nice to be you, that you sit in your place of privilege where, you haven't went through what I went through. So you could say all that. I was like, but I'd like to see what you would do if you were in my shoes. And she just looked at me and she said, you've put me in your shoes because I've been empathizing. I've been with you this whole time. She said, but I'm done with it. So it's late and I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to go home and I'm going to bed. See you later. Good night. And I was incredulous. And I said, what do you mean? I was like, you're just going to walk out, leave me in this state? Like, how could you do something like that? I was like, it ought to be nice. And again, I played the victim card again. I wish I could just go to sleep and sleep like a baby. I wish it was so easy for me that I could just decide to go to bed. And she looked at me and I'll never forget it. She just looked at me for a minute and she just said, oh, you can. See, it's a choice. It's a choice. You could sit here on this couch and commiserate as you do every night, or you could choose to turn that off and go to sleep. And something clicked when she said that and she left. And I sat there and I just was stunned. And I thought about it. And I thought, can I actually make this choice? Can I shift my focus to actually giving my body what it needed and just laying down and going to sleep? And I did. I saw the choice and I made that choice. I slept like a baby, first time in a long time. And I woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. And there was a new sense of possibility. As silly as it may sound, I honestly didn't know I had that choice, that I could choose where the focus, where my focus went. I didn't know I had that choice. But from that point on, I realized where my focus goes is my choice. Right. And then, the old saying, where focus goes, energy flows.
Right.
Yep. So from that point on, I started to become open to gaining my freedom.
Okay.
Through the choice of my focus. Coaches started to come into my life, and that the rest was history. And I started to get into this world. And then one day there was a conversation I was having with somebody who was struggling with addiction, and we were just talking. I was kind of giving them my story and how I was able to shift my focus. And she looked at me and she just said, "Have you ever thought about doing this?" I said, "Doing what?" She said, "This, like what you're doing with me right now, like helping me." And honestly, she's like a coach or something. I had never thought about that. I didn't even dream that could be a possibility. But when she said that, it woke something up in me, and I began to investigate that, and that started to set me on a trajectory of potential coaching, and then eventually that led to me becoming a coach. So, yeah,
fantastic. See, as I tell people, you need to get off the cross. We need the wood. See, when you get off the cross.
I like that.
Right.
Wow. That's a good.
Right? It's like, it does. It opens up your mind and it opens up the doors, and you'll be surprised what you can now see that the universe has been trying to show you all along. It is absolutely fantastic. So I'm glad that you showed up in this space and allowed yourself to experience all that you needed to experience so that you too can stand in that gap to help others. So what are some of the root causes of poverty? People are really, some people are really struggling with that. I know I do a lot of teaching on my end about how even your thoughts and your words affect your income. So what are some of the root causes of poverty that you have seen played out?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the beginning point of it is actually a belief in lack. That lack exists. Now people will say, no, it does. I've seen it. We've experienced poverty. But the manifestation, so life doesn't begin at the level of form. It begins at the level of consciousness, at the level of, if you think about it, where does all life begin? Everything that exists, you think about if you're married, if you have a certain job, if you're living in a certain house, at some point, that was an idea, a concept inside at the level of mind. So it did not exist in form first. Well, most people think that until it exists in form, it doesn't exist. No, the moment you conceive of it, it exists. It's now being created. So what is lack? I like to come back to what is lack? Well, lack is a belief that something does not exist. It's a belief in non-existence. So if we just take a moment and say, what is not, isn't something that if something doesn't exist, that means it's not real. So lack doesn't exist. That's the good thing about non-existence is it doesn't exist. So lack actually does not exist. And we know this from quantum mechanics, from quantum science, that everything that exists comes from the same source. We call that the quantum field. Well, what exists at that level, at the quantum field level? Everything exists. So another way I like to look at this is if we're looking at the finite form, then we're always going to be cognizant of what we don't have. So let's take, like, who's the richest person in the world right now? Is it Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatever? Well, people think that they have all this money in their bank account, but I know who has more money. So life has more money because there's more money outside of their bank account than inside their bank account. That's always the way it is. So if I fixate on what's inside the bank account, I'm going to automatically, subconsciously, my mind is going to, focus on all the money I don't have, and I'm going to feel impoverished or lacking. But we could do this with anything, but let's sometimes, in order to take it out of the monetary conversation, I like to come back to air for a moment. It's okay. Let's look at air. How much is air worth? Right? Can we put a price tag on it? No, it's actually so valuable that it's infinite in value. So if we don't take the next breath, life is gone. That's how valuable it is. It's extremely important. So how much air do we have? Well, if I just look at what's in my account, I may get worried because that's my lungs, right? If I look in the bank account of my lungs, there's only a finite amount of air. But I don't worry about running out of air. I never say, oh yeah, I wonder if there's going to be enough air for me to breathe for the rest of the day or the rest of the week or the month, right? It never crosses my mind. I just assume there's plenty of air. Why? Because I don't look at my air. I don't look at air as only the air in my lungs. It's the air in my lungs. It's the air outside my lungs. The trees are contributing to the air I'm breathing. The trees are giving off oxygen. We give off carbon dioxide. It's a symbiotic relationship. That's what an economy is. It's exchange. It's giving and receiving. Well, what are we giving and receiving ultimately? Energy. Mm-hmm. So what is money? Money is, we call it currency. The root word of currency is current. Energy. Well, how much energy exists? How much energy is there? All of it. Can't even put a number on it.
Can't even put a number on it. Right.
It's infinite. So how much energy do I have access to? All of it. Just like we have access to all the air there is. Now I can't access it all. I can't access it all at the same time, right? I can only take so much in my lungs, and then I must exhale so I can inhale. So our financial life, and when it comes to poverty, and poverty is simply a manifestation of a misunderstanding of reality in which that we perceive that lack exists. And so when lack is our starting point, that's all we can imagine. And then we begin to react to that untruth, so to speak. But when the quotient shifts from limit to unlimited as our starting point, and when we understand that the starting point of everything that exists is at the immaterial level, when we understand that, that's when the shift begins to happen, and we realize, okay, my starting point is everything. And that took a while for me because I was raised with some subliminal messaging, which is, my dad used to say all the time, where money doesn't grow in trees. It's really difficult to come by. It's very hard. So that became an unconscious belief. And so that was my starting point. And that affected me for many years until I began to meet some people who had abundance, and they didn't seem stressed out. The message I received was, you got to work really hard. And then even then you can just basically make ends meet. You're barely going to survive. You work really hard just to make it. And then many times it's not enough. But I met a group of people one time, and this is in the beginning of my awakening to this concept. And I remember looking at them, and they were just they were living well, and had a lot of joy, were enjoying life. And I remember asking him, like, do you not have problems? Why is life not difficult for you? And he looked at me, he said, no, I have a lot of problems. He said, he goes, the difference between you and I is that you don't like your problems. I love my problems. I thought that was the strange. So why do you like your problems? He said, for one reason. He said, because I like solutions, but you don't get a solution without a problem. He's like, but see, the reason you don't like problems is because you have a belief that there's not an infinite source providing solutions behind the problem. You think there's limited resources. And so when there's a problem, when you face life, you're afraid of there won't be a solution. There won't be that resource there to solve the problem. So therefore there's this anxiety. He said, there's always a finite number of problems, but there is an infinite number of solutions, because the source of everything that exists is infinite in nature. And if you'll just have that as your starting point, you can approach life without the fear, just like I can take the next breath knowing it's there.
Yes. I find too that people tend to want their problem solved the way they want their problem solved. And I think that's incredibly limiting to the universal presence of principle, because there are just an infinite amount of ways to solve an issue, to bring you an answer. But people tend to want it solved just the way they want it solved. There's no other way. And then they're surprised when it's not solved that way.
Right. And that's usually from trauma. That's a trauma response, right? People want to control the process,
right?
Because there's not a trust that if I let go of this, if I just allow life to bring the solution to me, and I participate, not like we don't participate sitting, but no, we participate. But if we can trust that life is unfolding things just the way it needs to, maybe not the way I would do it, but the way it needs to be done, then we don't resist life. So, and that brings us to the point of, like, people are stressed, but I always say stress is an internal experience, right? You can't find stress outside somewhere, right? Stress is just an experience of life. And all stress is resistance. It's resistance to what life is doing in this moment. I'm in resistance mode. Well, this does bring about poverty, because when you resist life, you're going to lose because it's not going to, it's like standing on the beach, as the tide is coming and trying to hold back the ocean, right? You're not going to win that battle. So it's better to learn to float. If you're a surfer, to learn to ride the waves, because that's when life becomes enjoyable, when you can learn to, people talk about going with the flow, but really in reality, what we're doing is we're cooperating with what life is doing versus resisting it. And the reason we would resist it is because it doesn't feel safe. And that's usually from our own traumas that haven't been dealt with.
And I found if we pay attention and look around, answers and solutions are coming from everywhere. We just don't like those. I know it's almost like one of my friends that was a minister say that I don't, if someone says, well, I keep praying and there's no answer. And she says, no, you got the answer already. The problem is you didn't like the answer. So you're praying for a different answer. Right. So it's there already. It almost, shows up before you even really ask, when you start to think about it.
100%.
We just don't trust what we see, or we're conditioned that everything has to be hard. So it wasn't hard enough. As I used to be like that. No, that was too easy. Now it's like, God, I'm going to take a nap. Okay. I'm tired. However it comes, this comes. When I wake up, it'll be an answer. I'll be good, but I'm going to take a nap. I'm going to get it. That's my way of that's how I get myself out of the way.
So good. So good.
I take a nap. Right. That way I'm out of the way.
Because it's what you're doing in that is you're letting go. You're saying, okay, I'm letting go. Right. If you let go, it comes to you.
Right. It does. It does.
It's beautiful.
So I see you did transformational leadership. What exactly is transformational leadership?
Okay, so tr- leadership. A lot of people, and to go back to our education system for a moment, a lot of people think, well, if we can just know the right information, then that's
Oh
enough.
yeah,
That's what we know. We just learn. We read a few books, take some classes, and
right.
that's. But that I'm an author. I love books. I wrote a book, but I always tell people, a book will not change your life unless it becomes a book is a portal. Information is a portal that should lead you beyond the information. So, and what does that mean? Well, in my coaching work, when I'm talking to a client or we're talking to somebody, I always say all of our suffering, the degree to which we're suffering is the degree to which we have been unable to access the truth of who we are, right? So suffering is the indicator that shows us the gap in our perception, because suffering's a call home. When we're suffering, it's an inner cry. Something inside of us is saying this, something is off, something is not right. We need to experience something beyond this. Well, what we're here to experience is actually ourself. So I tell people, when you are experiencing the truth of who you are, the truth of your nature, then what happens is the suffering stops. You actually, and the experience is liberating. It feels expansive. It feels powerful. That's how you know. Well, that's transformational. Now, I could tell people who they are, right? We could come up with some amazing declarative statements, which are very powerful. I encourage people to adopt those. But just simply intellectually trying to wrap your mind around some propositional statements of truth doesn't lead to transformation. Experience, however, does. If you can experience yourself, always tells, you again, it's bring it back to relationships, right? If you're in a relationship, let's say people talk about being in love, right? Well, you could read a book about somebody. You could read it, like with my wife, if somebody had put together a memoir, or maybe she wrote a memoir and I got the book and I read about it, I could form a lot of great beliefs and ideas about her, but I really am not experiencing her until I actually get in her presence and can actually experience the presence of this person, this being. Well, I say the same thing about ourselves. When we can learn to experience the truth of who we are at the level of our being internally, that becomes transformational in nature. So one of the things we do in the coaching work is we give people tools to help people not only think correctly about themselves, which is important, but to actually experience themselves beyond the mind. So in leadership, to bring it back to transformational leadership, the best leaders are people who have let go of their own psychological construct. Some people call it the ego. When you let go of your persona, so to speak, you become a presence. So the stronger the persona, the more difficult the presence is. But if you can learn to let go of this persona and become very present with the people you're leading, the experience of the people you're leading is transformational. And because the best leaders, the greatest leaders, are not, they're not focused on trying to convince people who they are. The best leaders are people who simply by their own presence help the people they're leading understand who they are themselves, not the leader, but themselves. So it's when a leader has been with a group of people they're leading and they've been transformational in their interactions with them, that group of people will walk away feeling something about themselves that they didn't feel, experiencing something about themselves that they didn't experience before. And it's less about, what you think about the leader and more about what did you think about, how did you feel about yourself after the interaction? That's transformational leadership. And when it's helping people understand who they are, because it's from who they are where they're going to go on and, accomplish and do from that place. And that's what the point of leadership is, to help people transform.
we need a lot more of that too. A lot more leaders who are comfortable enough with who they are that they can help other people that they can bring the best out of other people. I mean, we could use that everywhere. That's wonderful.
100%.
It's just we could use that. So, what is our true responsibility? So, people who are listening to this now or later, what is their true responsibility? Because I want people to get started changing their lives. I think we're all playing way too small. I think we've all accepted too many limitations on what we can do and what we can't do, and that we actually need to really live bigger and accept more. So, what is our true responsibility here?
Great question. Okay, so before we talk about true responsibility, I need to separate the word responsible from another word because most people don't like the word responsibility. When they hear responsibility, they go, "Oh, what am I responsible for?" Like, "Oh, I don't want because responsibility kind of feels heavy." But the question is, why does it feel heavy? For a lot of us, it feels heavy because when we hear the word responsible, we actually hear the word liable. Liable means if you don't do this, like if you're liable, like if you're at a job and your boss says, "Hey, you're responsible for these 4 things," that really means you're liable for these 4 things. So liability has to do with a perceived threat, a perceived sense of if you don't do these things, then you are to blame in some way. So we don't like that. So what I like to say is, okay, let's separate that. Let's make liability is a different word. It's not responsibility, but our culture has married the two together. And I think that's a problem that prevents us from actually grasping the essence of what responsibility actually is, because we think it's liability, but it's not. Let's take liability, let's put it to the side and say, so then if it's not liability, what does it mean to be responsible? Well, in a nutshell, in the word responsible is really 2 words: response able. That's it. Response able. So the question is, I always tell people this: if it's just about your ability to respond, well, what do you have the ability to respond to? Everything. Like, we can respond to everything according to our ability. Now, people say, "No, there's certain things I can't do." Well, but according to your ability, you can respond in this moment. If we just look at this moment, I can respond to everything that may happen in this moment. There is nothing I can't respond to in this moment. So I tell people, take responsibility for everything in this moment. That simply just means your ability to respond. We will learn to take responsibility for everything in this moment, there's no room for disempowerment, because now there's a lot of things that may happen outside of my control. But the one thing that nobody can take from me is my ability to respond in this moment. How I respond is my choice. Now, there's always consequences and ramifications for every choice we make, but my ability to respond is mine alone. Mm-hmm. Nobody can take that from me. That is simply by taking responsibility for everything in your life that's happening. Again, not liability. It's not about who's to blame. It's simply saying, how can I respond to this? Do I have the ability to respond? The answer is yes. I have the ability to respond to everything. I'll give you an example of this.
Okay.
A little over a year ago, there was a conflict. I was watching the news, and there was a conflict in the Middle East between the Israelis and Palestinians. Now, in the past, I would just hear that on the news and, oh, it's always happening. I wouldn't even give it a thought. But after really grasping this term, to who's responsible for this? Not who's liable, but who's responsible for this situation going on in the Middle East? And I said, well, I am. I'm going to take responsibility for this. So what can I do? I'm not a political office holder. I don't have any, can't, engage in peace talks or anything like that. So I asked myself, what is in my ability as a human being living in Southern California, many miles away from the conflict? And I've actually traveled there. I've I love to travel. So I had a personal connection. Have friends in the region. So I thought to myself, well, I care. So I obviously want to take responsibility for this. So I was like, what's in my ability to respond? And then I realized that there is a powerful meditation that I know that involves visualization. It's a form of prayer, however you want to put this. But when what we visualize is actually one of the most powerful things, it's a powerful form of prayer. We can really, there's even been some studies that show that we have the ability to affect consciousness globally through our ability to visualize. So I actually, what came to mind when I asked what is in my ability to respond to this situation in the Middle East, that meditation came to mind. So I did a meditation, a visualization of peace for that region. That was my ability to respond. And I know, and I know the power of that. And so I felt really confident and good about that meditation. And so I was able to respond to that. I went to I go to the gas station. If a homeless person approaches me I don't have time, or, I don't have, I just try to avoid them because I don't want to be responsible. But now I go, who's responsible for that person? Well, I am. No, I'm not liable. But do I have the ability to respond? Of course. So sometimes my ability to respond goes as far as to look them in the eye and to give them dignity and to say, you matter. I'm going to be a non-judgmental presence. I'm going to listen to you. And if I feel that that's the best, for me to give the money, I may. If I don't, I won't. But I will always ask this question: what is in my ability to respond? How can I respond to this person? And there's always a response. If we will learn to do that, if all of us will learn to take responsibility for everything, there will be no problems on this planet. That's the power we have. But it starts with our lives, Yeah.
There's a minister in California that I follow, Michael Beckwith, and he says all the time that we should take the morning newspaper or the news as a prayer request. Pick something and pray for that, and visualizing that healing as the best possible way. And that's what we should all do. That's our responsibility. And that's something we can all do, is
Absolutely.
to stop and send some energy or send a prayer all the time to something, and be surprised, because a lot of people praying does change things. There's been so many experiments about that.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, I've done some personal healing just through prayer and moving energy around. So it's real. It is incredibly real, more than we think.
Well, every war starts with a visualization, right? It started in somebody's mind. So it works both ways.
That's right. It works both ways. That's right. And sometimes it started in their mind and they didn't have exactly that picture. But unfortunately, when you get 3 or 4 people together and you're not, I guess, looking at the good for all, just trying to protect yourself, which is something that we think we can do, is keep ourselves protected. But we came here to learn what we came here to learn, and we're going to learn it. So,
absolutely.
So, okay. So now, what is the spirituality essence, or what's to wholeness and healing? What's essential to being whole and healing? A lot of people who are listening are struggling with that. How do they become whole? How do they heal? A lot of people are having a lot of health problems, and nobody has any answers to some of them except some meds, and then they don't get better. So how can they use their own ability to heal, their own power to heal themselves?
It's a great question. I was actually having a conversation recently with somebody I'm working with, and I asked him, "What is your goal?" And he said, "I want to be healthy." And it's like, I really want to be physically healthy. And I said, okay. I said, I hear you, but my opinion, health isn't a good goal. And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, it's not the best goal to have. He said, "Well, what's better than that?" I said, I want you to think about what health is for a moment. is health is simply a byproduct. It's a byproduct of paying attention, right? So when we talk about meditation, what is meditation? At the end of the day, meditation is simply, there's methodology, there's things you do to meditate, but really the goal of meditation is not to meditate, but it's to become aware or attentive,
Right.
to pay attention.
Right.
So when we begin to pay attention, we begin to become meditative of our own existence, our own life. So health is a byproduct that comes with when we start paying attention to what we're putting in the body, right? Food. If we pay attention to the food, right? The reason most people are unhealthy in many ways is because of a lack of attention to what's happening in my body, what's my body saying, what's it giving me indications of, what kind of food am I putting in the body. We're in survival mode, in a rut, kind of on a hurry. We're doing things unconsciously. So there's two kinds of action in the world. There's compulsive action, and then there's conscious action. Compulsive action is simply actions that we take that are following a script, right? They're following programming. And whenever we're following a script or programming, it's not conscious, and therefore there's going to be things that get out of whack, right? And then health is one of those things that suffers because we haven't been paying attention. So I always say this: the goal should be to pay attention, to increase attention. Then what you will find is that the more attention this is true in relationships. If you pay attention to the relationships you're in, you pay attention to the food you're eating. If you start to pay attention to what the sensations, the emotional things that are happening in your spirit and your being, if you start to pay attention to that, what you will find is that health and wholeness becomes a natural outflow and byproduct of that increased attention. So when it comes to emotional health, I always like to tell people, pay attention to what you're feeling. Do not fall into the illusion or the trap that the mind likes to play of saying, the reason I'm feeling this way is because of something out there. No, they're just the trigger. Let's say it's your boss, a coworker, whatever. They may trigger you. Yes, people can trigger you, but they can only trigger emotion. So what is emotion? I like to say emotion begins with the letter E, energy in motion. Emotion is simply energy in motion, emotion. So when there's energy in motion, if somebody's triggering that energy, a situation's triggering that energy, I like to say, okay, they're triggering it, but the energy's inside of you already. If it wasn't there, it couldn't be triggered. So start paying attention to what's happening in you. Let the trigger be the trigger, but take your focus off of resisting the person, the situation out here. Bring it back to self and begin to feel something as simple as asking the question, what is it that I'm feeling? Feeling angry. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling afraid. Okay. Not a problem. It's okay to feel. What you feel, you heal, right? That's a principle, as a mantra I like to say a lot. What I feel, I heal. So actively feeling will lead to healing. People think it won't. We're afraid of feeling these emotions, but really it's the inability to feel them that keeps them stuck and trapped. So I like to say, let's name it. What's the emotion I'm feeling? Locate it in the body, and then begin to actively become conscious and pay attention to that and feel it. That is an easy step that all of us can do to begin to move into a state of health and well-being, because that's all that health and well-being is just increased attention.
Well, we are at the end of our time. I want to thank you for that. Thank you for joining me. This has been an absolutely great hour. So is there a website that the viewers or listeners can go to find more information about you? So share that.
Sure. Yeah. Most of my my book, podcast, coaching work, all of that can be found on my website, which is JamalJivanjee.com.
Okay. So we got that. And you got to get the book. It's a great book. So you got to read the book. And with that, I want to thank you again. I want to remind everyone out there, as I always say, may this day offer you exactly what you need in each unfolding moment. I want you to be inspired and to further notice. I want you to celebrate everything and do not go gently into that good night. I want you to find a hero worth dying for, and I want you to take it. Be the person that you are waiting for. Make today so awesome that yesterday gets jealous, and above all else, I want you to do it your way. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and as I always say, life is too short to drink cheap champagne. So until then, trust your greatness and embrace your power. Thank you, Jamal, and we'll until next time. Bye now.
Thank you.
I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, the Empowerment Doctor, and I want to encourage you to trust your greatness. In spite of what you're reading in the press, did you know that over 80% of all millionaires are self-made? The same is true for billionaires too. So, creating your fortune and having riches and financial stability is easier than you think. But there are a few things that you need to do first. First, I need you to know exactly what it is you want. One of the biggest obstacles to making money is our lack of understanding of money and our lack of understanding of what we want. The next thing is stop hosting pity parties. I'm telling you, 80% of the people don't care and 20% of the people think it's you. So if you could get those two things done, then you will be able to create a roadmap with action steps that will actually help you to live your dreams, to become financially independent. Have a great day.
But life's too short to drink cheap champagne, so I decided to buy me a better brand.